Hey, everybody. Thanks for being with us again as we continue through the Gospel of John, the 7th chapter. Just a reminder, if you weren't with us yesterday, we had a passage in which Jesus's brothers, and you can go back and unpack all that if you'd like to watch yesterday's episode. Jesus' brothers tell him he should go to this festival, the Festival of the Booths, which is in Judea. And Jesus says, I'm not going, you go if you want. And it's a significant passage. It's not particularly theological, but there's a lot in there. And again, if you missed yesterday's discussion, it might be worth going back to pick it up. But today we continue in verse 10 of chapter 7, and we find out that there's more to the story. So I'm going to read a few verses here, then we'll come back and talk our way through them. Verse 10, but after his brothers had gone to the festival, then he also went, not publicly, but as it were in secret. The Jews were looking for him at the festival and saying, where is he? And there was considerable complaining about him among the crowds. While some were saying he's a good man, others were saying, no, he is deceiving the crowd. Yet no one would speak openly about him for fear of the Jews. Let's just stop there, Michael, just a couple verses in. So after this kind of, it's probably overstated to call it an argument, after this discussion with Jesus and his brothers, we find out Jesus does in fact go up to the festival. And his brothers had told him, you should go and be seen. And Jesus instead goes, and it says he was in secret. Now that's not going to remain the case, but that's where the story starts. And here we have interesting details from John. The Jews are looking for him, saying, where is he? And the crowd is complaining, or at least not a small part of the crowd is complaining. And a few said, he's a good man, but others said he's deceiving the crowd. And then a very interesting line, Michael, no one would speak openly for fear of the Jews. In other words, whichever team they're on, he's a good man or he's deceiving the crowd, they just want to stay away. They know that the religious leaders, and when John says Jews, that's who he has in mind. These would all be Jews. When John says that, he has in mind those religious leaders, and the crowd knows that those religious leaders are wound up about Jesus, and it's better to just stay out of their way and stay off the record.
So this is a fascinating turn in the story. It is a little bit of a setup in the previous study that we had. Definitely, like Clint said, go back and listen to that. But when you have people saying, hey, the most effective thing for you to do is to go show people who you are, right? Go give them the signs, go teach them the lessons. And then here today, Jesus, instead of doing the thing that would make the most sense, he goes in secret. And there, we almost get the sense that Jesus is the one hearing these things, right? Jesus is amongst the crowd as there's considerable complaining about these differing ways of understanding who he is. John, once again, and not to sound like a broken record, Clint, but John is just upfront about the divisiveness of the revelation of Jesus Christ. John is not hiding that in any way. And it becomes abundantly clear in this gospel that Jesus is a divisive character that people are either able to see or they're not. And I think what's really striking here in the midst of this debate that John relates happening, whether or not on one hand Jesus is a good man or whether or not on the other that he's deceiving, the fact that they're all being silenced because of the fear of the Jews only serves to increase our awareness of how turbulent Jesus's relationship is with very influential Jews. Remember, here he's at the festival in Jerusalem, so he's at the center of Jewish power. And John in chapter 7 is already portraying that Jesus has gotten crossways with the Jews. We just had yesterday, he's being sought to be killed. Here, there's already this very, very strong debate happening. And John's laying out for us not just how some are repelled like a magnet, some are brought to him, but many are repelled from him. And that repellence is becoming even stronger as the story goes on.
Yeah, I think it's an important note that you added there, Michael. We've already been told that the Jews, these religious leaders, Jesus' enemies, growing in their animosity, were seeking to kill him. So he's on their radar not as just a frustration, but as someone to be eliminated. And again, that tension is now beginning to inform all of the tellings of the story and all of the crowd here. So let me continue, jump in here, verse 14, pick up another couple verses. About the middle of the festival, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. The Jews were astonished, saying, "How does this man have such learning when he's never been taught?" Then Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but him who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I'm speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there is nothing false in him." So now we have another one of these moments with Jesus and the religious leaders, the Jews, having a conversation, a conflict, really. It starts well enough. They are impressed by Jesus. At least they're impressed by the depth of his knowledge. How did he learn such things? Remember in John, Jesus always knows the backstory of what people are thinking and saying. So Jesus answered them. They don't necessarily say it to him, but Jesus answers them. "This is not my teaching. It's the one who sent me. Anyone who seeks the will of God will know whether a teaching is from God or not." And it would be easy to misread that and think that what Jesus is saying is that if we're trying to be faithful, we have some discernment. I think it's better to read it backwards and to say, those who know Jesus is true understand the teaching is from God. I think John is not here trying to elevate our ability to discern. I think he's trying to elevate Jesus and verify Jesus by the fact that those who are seeking God's will know that or encounter truth in the Christ, in Jesus. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there's nothing false in him. It's interesting, Michael. And I don't know if I would have thought to say it this way, but one of the distinctives I think I see in the Gospel of John is the things that the faith would say about Jesus. John often is comfortable coming directly from Jesus. So we would as faith people say Jesus doesn't seek his own glory, but he seeks the glory of God who sent him, and he is true and there's nothing false in him. But in John's comfortable with Jesus saying those things about himself. I think that's less true in the other gospels. Certainly a gospel like Mark,
Yeah.
you're not going to hear this language. But John is comfortable with Jesus proclaiming things that the church would later proclaim about him. And I think, that gives John a readable sense for people of faith. There's not a lot of confusion here in the way, say, well, you ask, well, why doesn't Jesus want people to know who he is in Mark? That's not here. This is Jesus saying things about himself that we would later come to agree with.
If we could read this text with fresh eyes, Clint, I do think it is a challenging text, and this exists in this theme or this strand that runs throughout the Gospel of John. It's very challenging when we have this idea that Jesus is the one who claims to be speaking for God. He's literally here. The teaching is from God. And then there are those who seek their own glory, but Jesus is the one who's seeking to give glory to the one who sends him. This is very, very robust Christian theology. This is intended to be a primer for our understanding as Christians in the generations to come, right? John is explicit about the fact that we're given this book to have enough information so that we can believe. And the ways in which Jesus continues to teach, even if it is against the grain of the culture and against the grain of the religious leadership of Judaism at the time of his life, what Jesus is doing here is making a compelling case, as told through the Gospel of John, as to the fact that he is the Son of God doing the Father's will, while yet in the beginning of the gospel saying that he is all at once a co-creator. He was with God from the very beginning. This combination of factors, the fact that Jesus speaks for God, and in this case is not claiming to be God, it is in fact claiming to be teaching God's will. And then at the beginning of the book, made it very, very explicit that Jesus is indeed the God himself, that he's been present since the creation. This is a holding intention of the church's historic theology about the fact that Jesus is fully God, that Jesus is fully human. And yes, you could get this. There are snippets of this, there are breadcrumbs of this throughout the other gospels that exist. You can find them if you're going to look through it. But nowhere in Jesus's voice, no place more clearly in terms of the consistent themes of the book is this kind of robust, nuanced theology present. And I think that the church owes a great deal of our understanding of who Jesus is. Much of our creeds, much of our beliefs stem from this book. They stem from Jesus's own teaching in red letters that we have in front of us. And I think, Clint, that makes this book eminently important. It also makes this book, in some ways, less accessible in the sense that it's not just the story of Jesus. There's some deep lessons being taught in the midst of it. And we've got to stay awake and we've got to stay tuned if we're going to see them.
I think one of the benefits of John is that as we've just been saying, Michael, that John encapsulates what we would call Christology, in other words, our theology of Christ. John encapsulates that and clarifies it in a way that I think is more open-ended in the other Gospels, and that gives us maybe in some ways the sharpest look at Jesus theologically speaking. Let's go ahead and finish out the rest of this passage. Jesus continues to talk to the Pharisees, or the Jewish leaders here. Did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keep the law. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who's trying to kill you? Jesus answered, I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. Moses gave you circumcision. It is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. In every one of the Gospels, we, as those who come later, get to listen in on some arguments over the details of things that were known in Jesus' day. These aren't things that are very important to us or that play much of a role for us anymore. Things like whether they wash their hands on the Sabbath, or whether there's healings on the Sabbath, or in this case, an argument over circumcision, which becomes very big in, say, some of Paul's letters like Galatians. But every gospel gives us a chance to try and enter in a few of these family arguments that Jesus has with Jewish leaders. And that's what's happening here. So the idea of circumcision is that you had to be circumcised. It was expected that a baby boy would be circumcised on the 8th day of his life. Now, as you probably know, there's a prohibition of doing work on the Sabbath, which is Saturday in their culture. However, if a child is born on Friday of the preceding week, then their circumcision would fall on Sabbath and they would be circumcised. It was understood that the circumcision was more important to do on the 8th day than it was to prohibit that being done on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is saying here, you have this law that says don't do anything on the Sabbath, but you have another law that you follow that says it's okay on the Sabbath. I healed the whole body. I gave a person their life back. I changed a person's reality and healed them completely. And you want to argue that it's on the Sabbath. You do a little thing on the Sabbath and you say it's okay. I do a life-changing thing on the Sabbath and you're ready to kill me. And then this line at the end, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. And there's a sense in which I think, Michael, that's a good summary of a lot of Jesus' conflicts, right? That when you strip it all down, what Jesus is saying is, look, if it's not for your misinterpretation of things, you would be able to see that I'm doing good. I'd go further than that. I'm doing God's work. I'm doing godly things. And because you won't see that, because you're wrapped up in your own stuff and misusing the law, you're ready to have me branded as a heretic and a blasphemer because you simply don't get it. And that fits well into John's perspective.
I think there's another thing happening here that is really mind blowing, really honestly, here. And notice that he's referencing the man healed on the Sabbath. You might remember, and you'd have to go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 5 to find the story of the man by the pool of Bethsaida who Jesus heals on the Sabbath day. And then you realize, whoa, 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 aren't we here now in the middle of chapter 7? So it's been an entire selection now of stories, which this story is bookending. And Clint, that's amazing that you begin to see that how carefully John has constructed this telling of Jesus's life so that you can understand that the revelation moment started by Jesus restoring this man's body, has gone through all of these conflicts and teachings and lack of revelation and abundance of revelation and debate and fight. And now we come right here to this unbelievably pithy statement, which you can now see sort of tying the bow around the whole package. And it's amazing. Do not judge by appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. I don't think that this is just a statement about morals. This isn't just about what's right and wrong. I think this is also about judge rightly about the appearance of the one standing in front of you. I think there's a sense in which theologically, John wants it to be clear that with right eyes, with right hearts, we can see and judge rightly about reality. What's reality? That's Jesus Christ. That's his presence. That's his restorative power. If you don't see him, then you seek to kill him. Then you're repelled by him. That you're set off on an entirely different path, and a path that leads to death and violence and destruction because you're running from the source of life. You're running from the one who restores. And when you run away from restoration, you run headlong into destruction. And John is portraying this through Jesus's signs and miracles, right? Through the works he's doing with real people. And also, I think one of the ways that we've said so often now, Clint, John also does it uniquely through the explicit teaching of Jesus. Those are always bound together as one. You always have the sign with the teaching. And to those who believe, it is a nourishment of the faith. To those who disbelieve, it is simply ammunition towards the assumption that they made from the beginning.
Yeah, and we want to follow here. I mean, this is there's a boldness in this. Essentially, we get to the end of this story. Jesus says, "Judge with right judgment," and the clear implication is you're using wrong judgment. You are wrong. Jesus is telling these experts in religion, these men who are charged with and believe themselves capable of discerning the work of God, of understanding and interpreting the law. These are men whose lives are centered in the practice of religion. And Jesus is saying to them in pretty clear words, you're wrong about everything. You're wrong about me. You're wrong about the law. You're wrong about yourselves. You're wrong about God. It's easy to read a sentence like that and miss the offensiveness in it. But keep in mind, I mean, think about what Jesus is telling these people and think about how much these people don't want to hear that. That's a bold thing that Jesus says. You are wrong. You're judging wrong. Your judgment can't be trusted. And certainly that's going to anger them.
The way in which we see Jesus conduct himself in John is all at once clear and revelatory and also confusing and spiritually deep. And the honesty with which he's portrayed is, I think, an inspiration to how we too are called to live our lives of faith, to be able to give account with simple words to what we believe, while also having experienced and have the awareness of how deep this faith goes and how truly uh, uh, endless, the extent of the revelation of Christ and the ways in which that nuances and fills our life with meaning and value. It's all there at the same time. And John makes it clear that in Christ, it's been there since the beginning. Thanks for being with us. Hope that this has been helpful. Certainly give this video a like if you found it interesting, helpful, or maybe even challenging, and do subscribe so you can stay with us as we go through studies like this. Clint, this text in many ways began in chapter 5, and so subscribing gives you a way to stick with us as we go on long journeys through the gospel like that. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks.